Thank you for the introduction. You said that people were excited. We are lawyers. I am not that sure that excitement is the right term for that, but thank you for the invitation. Thank you all for being here to discuss something that in my view is, like a trending topic right now in the legal industry, and of course in all sectors that are affected by by different regulations. We got a great panel and multicultural and international and diverse panel. We have with us here, and I will ask them to join here with us. We got Diana Paredes. She is co-founder and CIO of Suede Labs. Diana is the CEO of the company software platform that enables financial institutions to understand and deliver regulatory requirements. Prior to founding Suede, Diana has a successful career in investment banking, covering all assets classes at Barclays, Merrill Lynch, across sales, trading, and structuring. Also, very welcome.
Thank you.
Also, we got here, big applause to them. We also got here Cristina Mesa, one of my colleagues. She is partner at the Garrigues, partner of the Intellectual Property Department, also joint head of the Garrigues Fashion Law Group, passionate about new technologies and the fourth industrial revolution, providing recurring advice to clients on internet-related matters and new forms of communication and cultural and business participation, including e-commerce platforms and so on. She is admitted by the Madrid Bar Association and also the New York Bar, and is an arbitrator before Adigital. And also we got over there in the distance Adriana Knapp, senior public policy professional with a strong background in financial services regulation and an advocacy focus on all digital and innovation topics, cybersecurity, data, also covering shadow banking, securitization, and tax. Welcome to the panel. We are open, of course, to discussions all together. We have no much time, so being around lawyers, this is sometimes good news. But in general terms, I would like to start asking you several questions on a very general and big approach. What's your view on the current situation of the regulation of the technology? Is the existing regulation adequate? Is it sufficient? What do you think?
I'm trying to start.
Okay, you can start.
I think so. Currently, I think we can all agree it's not sufficient. But I think we want to really enter a world where, when regulators really look at regulating technology, that they really understand the detail that there is to do. Because the last thing we want is to regulate technology in a way that prevents innovation. Okay. And so I think that that's really the danger and the balance that we have to strike right. And regulating technology, I think obviously, do you regulate the technology or do you regulate the concept behind that? And I think understanding in depth what a technology can do for good versus what it can do in bad is actually where the detail really lies. And so we need regulation, but it needs to be done in a way that's really intelligent, that is agile, and that doesn't take 5 years of consultation, and then you have to change this for another 5 years. You need more time, because the technology moves so quickly that by the time you regulate one thing, then everything will have changed already, right? Okay. And so there's an element of timeliness and of the right level of regulation.
Okay, thank you. Cristina, what's your view? Is it sufficient? Is this adequate?
I think it's not sufficient nowadays, because if you think like 20 years ago, the companies we are using, like I'm thinking about Facebook, Google, TikTok, didn't even exist. So the technology has changed a lot, and probably the laws that were drafted 20, 25 years ago are not sufficient to regulate the actual environment.
Mm-hmm. Adriana, what do you think?
Hold on one second. I'm off mute. Hi, everybody. Thank you, and muchas gracias por tenerme aquí. Un placer. Bueno, I think that the Commission, if we look at it, from a European perspective, is definitely going in the right direction. Something that we've always lobbied for is for a level playing field and to not to regulate the technology. So 2 years ago, the Commission finished work on a report which was called ROFIEG, the Regulatory Obstacles for Financial Innovation Expert Group. And this group was made up of the different ESA, so EBA, ESMA, IOPA, and the industry. And across the board, for quite a long long time, they spent time going through regulations and looking at what were the obstacles and then what they could do to future-proof regulations. So the findings were they had 30 findings, and they understood they needed to remove fragmentation, that international coordination was incredibly important, that there needed to be standards, and there needed to be a fast, agile way to adapt regulations that in time that change. So they understood that the regulations that currently stand will need a review and will need updating to take into account. So MiFID and EMIR and things like that will need to take into account data protection and different technologies. But their aim is to keep technology neutral. And to create a level playing field, so that means that fintechs and that the risk is regulated and not the activity.
Okay, so I understand from your responses that you are not quite happy with the existing regulation. And based on that, what's your view on the trend? I mean, what should the regulator do? Should we regulate everything on a proper way? We should deregulate and go into the basics. I would say that I always say that my favorite book is the Civil Code. It's not very popular, but it's quite funny when you do digital, and most of the basics are enough. But what's your view? We need new laws, or we need to avoid many regulation, existing ones, and go into the basics? What do you think?
So I would say that it's a bit of both, right? So you want, again, to really go into the detail and understand where you need to start from scratch, because obviously the regulation will not be taking care of things like artificial intelligence, which is obviously very recent technologies advancement, and you want it to be appropriate and to the point. So in some instances, you want to maybe do new regulation where there is really nothing, okay. But then, if there are things that exist already, I'm a big fan of really building on what there already is. The last thing people like when they're regulated in particular is to basically end up in a situation where you're regulated for one thing that's very similar to something else in another regulation, and then you end up having to do 3 times exactly the same work, but for different regulators. Okay. So I think there's definitely an element of that. And we have the privilege of being part of the World Economic Forum Technology Pioneer Group and Global Innovators, and part of the work we do with the World Economic Forum is this kind of concept around like agile regulation, right? So we are a RegTech, we work a lot with RegTech, but we do regulatory technology for the financial industry. And what we have found is that the concept of being agile is almost more important than the regulation itself. So it has to really be this feedback loop between the regulation coming out, the industry being able to give efficient feedback, so that then the regulation can adapt again. Okay. And the timeliness, again, is very important.
Okay, thank you. Christina, are you also a fan of the Civil Code, or you are looking for new regulations?
I'm a total fan of the Civil Code, but apart from that, I think that even though regulation is sometimes seen as an enemy for the development of technology, it's not always like that. So if we go back again 20 years ago, the Communications Decency Act in the United States or the e-commerce directive in the European Union were totally necessary in order for internet or tech-based companies to develop. So maybe what we need is a mix, and I fully agree that the main problem here is to be agile, to be able to run parallel to the industry and not to be a burden, but help in order to boost innovation. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Adriana, what do you feel?
So I think that there's a couple of things. Like I said, with the ROFIG, I think we're definitely going down the right way, and I know that we're doing the same thing in the UK. For instance, right now, we just finished a consultation for the BCBS IOSCO on cryptocurrencies and the prudential treatment of cryptocurrencies, which was quite a difficult consultation and a lot of permutations. But the one thing that we continue to sustain and to push is that if there are currently prudential regulations that are fit for purpose and can cover that, then we should not be adding another layer on just because it's a cryptocurrency, just because it's something new. And so we need to look now, if there are additional risks, and there's something, if you're talking about Bitcoin or something like that, that's not permissioned and is not transparent, then, something can be added. But we needed to, because everything was sort of being blocked in together, And we had a call with the BCBS and the FSB and the Bank of England and a bunch of the Fed the other day, and they seem to understand that. And it's like we need to look at what is already existing. Does that fit? Is it fit for purpose? Does it maybe need some adjustments, some tweaking? And then from there we move on, because as Diana said, you don't want to add these layers where you end up, um, having to provide reporting or adhere to regulations, same but different in many different ways.
Okay, thank you. I mean, you all have very international backgrounds. We got extremely good panelists today. And I would like to ask a next question regarding this international approach. It is realistic looking for an international regulation focusing on technology, or this is too optimistic? Christina, go ahead.
I think it will be nice,
Okay.
but I think we are very far away from that. Okay. I don't see like an international feeling from governments of going ahead all together to regulate anything at all, not technology, but anything. So if we are realistic, I don't think this is going to happen. But on the other side, I think that the creation of standards, like with the participation of some governments, organizations, and private companies, is working very well. So this is like so-so.
Okay, I love discussion, but when you read the title of the panel, it says regulate the activity and not the technology. So this is a spoiler itself. But I would like to check based on that, which is, I mean, how do you feel the risk of regulating technology and not the activity? What do you think when the legislator takes, I would like to regulate blockchain, or I would like to regulate artificial intelligence, and not thinking on the activity itself?
I think it's very dangerous.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Adriana, go ahead.
Go, Adriana.
No, go ahead, Diana. Go on, Diana. No, absolutely not. Don't worry. I think there's a bit of a lag.
A delay. Don't worry. So I think it's very dangerous. I think if there's anything we've realized in the past few years is that the regulators are not necessarily in the best position to regulate technology, right? Like politicians, legislators, they can't necessarily understand the detail of how implementation of technology really happens. And so this is also why this international effort, it would be fantastic to get, but it's very difficult to get there. So I think there is an element where we need the governments and politicians and legislators to become upskilled in what technology actually does before they start touching to really look at regulation around it, because if not, you end up with situations, GDPR is a great example of successful collaboration at the European level, but when you go into what happened in implementation, I mean, it's not very efficient. The whole point of GDPR was to regulate, in particular, the large tech companies, but it had a huge, relatively negative impact on small companies and small startups and scale-ups who were not established enough to even have enough data to have their businesses ready. And so I think that that's a very good example of if regulators go and start doing things and they don't understand what they're really doing in the detail, it can really, really, stifle innovation. And I think that that's, where we want to be very careful.
Okay. I love people complaining about legislator, about laws. It's not only against the lawyers. Adriana, you wanted to say something. Go ahead, please.
No, I wanted to say that it is very much in the, whenever you speak to anybody in the Commission these days and you speak to any of the regulators in the UK, it's very much front of mind for them that they do not want to regulate the technology, and they're aware of that and they understand. So, but there are things like, for instance, in artificial intelligence that, it has to be unbiased. You have to be able to explain it. You have to understand, you can't use it if you can't understand the outcome. So there are things around the technology that would be regulated in order to use it. So it is, and as Diana said, the upskilling is something we've been talking about for years, and they are getting better at bringing in experts and getting us more involved. And one of the fantastic sides of the pandemic was the collaboration and the roundtables on a weekly basis with all the experts from the Commission, from Parliament, and with people from industry and fintechs and regtechs, and everybody sort of putting in their 2 cents. And really, it was, they were sitting there moderating this, but wanting to learn and ask us questions. So it's been a very open dialogue. So I think that the regulators of 5 years ago and the regulators of tomorrow are completely different, and these new ones are technology-driven regulators, as far as I can see from the work we've done.
Okay. Let me ask a question to Cristina. I mean, you got a privileged vision. You are admitted to practice law in the US and in New York and also in Spain. But being Spanish and from the European perspective, do you feel that the European legislator is properly approaching the, let's say, neutrality on regulating tech industries or tech-related activities?
Okay, there is a long way to go yet, but when thinking about the most important pieces of legislation that are being discussed, and I'm thinking, for instance, in the Digital Services Act,
Okay.
or the proposal for artificial intelligence, I think that they are doing so. So they are trying to keep an eye into the market, and for instance, in the Digital Services Act, of course, they are not regulating a technology, they are regulating an activity, and they are taking into account important things, for instance, the size of the companies they are regulating. The obligations for startups are not the same than the obligations imposed on very large platforms. And in the case of the proposal for the regulation of artificial intelligence, if you hear the title, it's like, okay, this is regulating technology, but fully. But it's not true, because they are regulating specific cases for the use of this technology. So if properly done, we will see, it can be like a really helpful tool in order to create certainty in the market. And this is very good to look for investment. But we will see.
This is quite similar when the Spanish regulator changed the laws regarding cookies, and they were very focused on cookies, and the industry said, well, okay, let's use pixels. So all the regulation is, I mean, we have been discussing for a couple of years, and the day after, it's worse nothing. Let me jump. I mean, we got two people from the fintech scenario and industry, and I would like to, and you know that lawyers love risk and challenges. What are the risks and challenges for the fintech industry with regard to the new regulation plan to come into force in the next coming years?
So I would say, I mean, there is a global element here, right? So I think the European regulation that is, getting into place and that people are working on, the most important thing around it is going to be really good marketing, right? Because the risk is that, typically Europe comes across as not being the most business-friendly, entrepreneurial-friendly to foster innovation. And in some ways, you were saying the name of the paper and the consultation is already scaring people away. And what we have to understand is that, so I run a technology company. I am globally, in the stage of what's happening. And so I have to think, well, do I want to continue expanding my business, in the US, where they have a much more lenient approach to all sorts of things that really do help to foster innovation? I'm competing with China, right? Where there, the way that they even do technological innovation and regulation and government is actually very intertwined, right? And so some startups have more or less access even directly to the government when it comes to the certain bits of legislation that even help them to become bigger companies. So this is the spectrum, is that, Europe really in that kind of world tends to be the most conservative. And the big risk is that, at least from what I'm seeing, it's definitely way more conservative than what's in the global stage. And that's a problem. And part of the issue is that by being too prescriptive in some ways, like with the example you just gave, technology companies will find other ways anyway. So then you end up with regulation that is, one, not efficient, but more importantly, it also scares the new companies that want to come and start doing business in Europe. And I think that is just a terrible pity, because in Europe, we really have the opportunity to be the pioneers about what regulation could look like for the good of society, right? Because we are also competing with, technology companies that are doing things in a certain way in certain countries where they don't necessarily care about privacy. And then you also have, a whole other spectrum that we can represent in Europe in terms of really pioneers that do regulation that is not only, efficient to regulate, but also good for society, good for innovation. And that's the opportunity that I think we're missing, and we're not proud enough about what we could be doing in that space.
Okay. Adriana, do you agree? This is your same view on risk and challenges on the fintech industry?
Yeah, and I think that the fragmentation is also a problem. There's, you're talking about innovation and digital, and there's something that has no boundaries, and we're in a much more international world. And one of the things that we push for all the time is international cooperation, harmonization, and some sort of, interoperability. For instance, the new digital identity that is coming out in Europe, EIDAS, really, that's fantastic that and I think it's now basically a mandate by the governments, will be mandated that people have to implement it, because when it's a, you can do it, it wasn't going to work. But people are so global now, and businesses are so global, and in order to develop the capital markets union, which was a big push for the SMEs in Europe, you need to have things where they can expand their customer base outside of Europe as well. So in order to do that, you need to have things that are interoperable, and that fragmentation is reduced, and that there are standards that would help. So one of the things, again, that we talk a lot to the FSB and the BCBS, and try to pull it up at that level, because there are certain things like data. So, data localization, a bad thing for the economy. Stopping the free flow of data, a bad thing for the economy. Things that need to really be, we need to look at it from a broader perspective, digital IDs, again, all that kind of thing, because you've got someone in Spain that's doing business with somebody in New York. You need to be able to look at their records or anything like that. You need to know who this person is, and it needs to at least have been verified by someone. So in order for us to continue, and in order for the fintechs and the startups to grow to an international stage, there has to be this interoperability and reduction in fragmentation and harmonization.
All your answers, I would say that all your answers remember me a couple of years ago when I started studying law. I remember my first day at the faculty, there was one professor say, "You know the reason you are here?" And I was thinking, my parents, no, it's not that. This is because law is intended for one reason, providing certainty to all the individuals and all the companies. So when we are fostering this innovation and this technology-focused approach, is always, I guess, intending to provide a proper scenario for all of us to discuss. Let me jump into another question, and you started on that, and you mentioned China. You said, Diana, you mentioned...
Don't get me in trouble with China.
No, nothing to do. Let me be rude on that. There is a saying, very rude, and sorry for that, that said that US people, they innovate. Chinese people, they say Asians copy, and what we do in Europe is regulating. Christina, from the European perspective, do you feel that Europeans are the whole time regulating and avoiding companies to enter into the EU arena?
Well, I don't want to open my Twitter account after this question, okay? It will be like terrible, but I think that this has changed a lot. Probably the most accurate one was the one related to the European Union regulators, but with regards to China, if you have a look into the number of patents, so I don't think that China is copying anymore. They are leading the application of patents, and more especially, they are leading the application of patents related to artificial intelligence. Mm-hmm. So I think that they can do whatever they want. They can copy, they can create, they can innovate, and we have to be more open-minded. Fully. And of course, Europeans, we regulate, and I don't know if we have to be proud for being known as the best regulators. I would prefer being known for being the better innovator. But it is also true that there are some voices in the United States asking for regulations similar to the ones being implemented in the European Union, because somehow US citizens think or feel that they are losing control about certain values, such as privacy.
Okay. What about Diana? Adriana, what do you think? Do you think that there is a block in the European regulation that do not permit international companies to enter the market in good circumstances? Do you think it's just the regular stuff, or what's your view?
Adri, do you want to start?
So we're kind of right in the middle of all of this right now with a legislative proposal called DORA, Digital Operational Resilience Act. And so previously, I don't think so. It's something, again, that we push for to ensure that the Capital Markets Union package would allow investments from abroad, not just, investments within Europe, because, that was never going to grow enough. It was only sort of domestic within the EU. But DORA is to ensure digital operational resilience. So different from regular operational resilience, which is business continuity management, it takes into account ICT risk and third-party risk management, so things like the CSPs, outsourcing, and cybersecurity. the fear is, and within DORA there isn't this, but the fear is that there's talk in some circles of this data localization, which means to keep things local within the EU. And this would be going back in time. This would be, obviously, ensure security, ensure, the privacy of data, but we need to have that free flow of data across the world, with adhering to the data protection regulations. So that's the only thing I see where we're starting to go a little bit backwards, and it isn't anything that's put in place, but it's something that's being talked about in certain circles in order to, I think, retain the sovereignty and retain and protect, businesses within certain countries. But really, we need to be allowed to spread outside of Europe. I don't think that other regulations necessarily, GDPR makes it a little bit difficult, but I think it's not difficult to adhere to. But I don't think I would say that there are other regulations that create any problems. I mean, within DORA right now, it's still being discussed in the Parliament and the Council. One of the issues on intergroup. So we outsource a lot of our services into a ServCo from, say, Switzerland as a Swiss bank, or the UK into the EU. And the discussion is now, do these entities have to have a legal base or an office based in the EU so that there's a legal recourse to them if something went wrong? The original intention of the regulation was to look at a CSP, one of the large cloud service providers or large service providers into the EU, that they had a legal entity in the EU. But we think that requiring the intergroup, which is already under the company umbrella, is an unnecessary layer.
Diana, your turn.
So I would say the problem is more around marketing in Europe. I think there's a lot of really good stuff that happens. We have great entrepreneurs, but then when they look at growth, they go to the US, right? And that happens very quickly. And this concept of marketing, I feel very strongly about, because there's a lot of really good things that happen, but there is not really this promotion at the European level that we're doing this in Europe as a whole. There's a lot of dislocalization from one country to the other that really takes away from the realities of what we could stand for in Europe when it comes to regulation of technology. Whether it is, promoting more our tech companies and supporting them more in investment, and also making, political decisions where in Europe we start taking technology seriously, because we realize the risks of not doing that. And I think that at the political level, obviously you have some people who are more vocal than others politically in a positive way for technology, but there is also a lot of fear around technology in a way that there isn't in the US or places like China. So I think it's more of a cultural positive marketing about what technology can do for good and how Europe can play a role in that, versus a lot of people still in Europe feel that they're competing for their jobs with technology. They feel that artificial intelligence will reduce their privacy. And it's the role, I think, of tech companies, of course, but also of politicians to educate themselves sufficiently to have a conversation around that's educational, that takes the population with them into the next era of innovation, which is really what we should be doing.
We got people saying time out. Let me be very, very close, like an elevator pitch. 10 seconds, how would you say the legislator to, an advice to the legislator to regulate? How would you say in 10 seconds?
10 seconds, I would say to focus in agile regulation, in doing legislative pieces that are more like minimum viable products, and then really doing an iterative process where you can solve with the industry at a much faster pace than what we're seeing.
Thank you.